A broken hero receives legal permission to become the villain's executioner.
Spoiler warning for this Korean manhwa recap.
Gang-Yu Seo was once bound by the heroic rule that even the worst villain should not be killed.
That belief collapses after his squad is destroyed and his brother becomes another victim inside the prison system. Now the story pushes him into Ruculus, a place filled with criminals, failed ideals, and people who treat punishment like politics. These chapters widen the conflict beyond revenge.
Raosa's old rules, Sinka's twisted dream of a new human race, Canis's cruelty, and the Hero Association's legal panic all force one question: when justice fails, does execution become protection or another disaster? A devastated city becomes the first reminder of what the old hero code was trying to contain.
Raosa arrives in white and gold armor after other heroes have already fallen, and the battlefield is not presented like a clean rescue. It is exhaustion, confusion, and two young villains who do not seem to understand the weight of what they have done.
Miel and Maelle respond with bright pink power, but Raosa barely moves under the pressure.
She overwhelms them without looking shaken, then decides to take them to their teacher, Mago. The twist is not just that Raosa wins. It is that she tries to turn victory into reform, pushing toward a cause that could change how villains are punished. Far away, in Ruculus, Gang-Yu and a guard discuss those rules before red thread-like power erupts and a bride-like woman steps into the prison. The purple-haired woman arrives like a ceremony has begun in the middle of a prison nightmare. Sinka steps through a spatial effect with attendants behind her and faces a bloodied man in a prison uniform. Her elegance only makes the scene colder, because every polite word comes with threat underneath it. When the atmosphere turns rude, red jagged force cuts through the space, and she corrects the room like a bride offended at her own wedding. She names Canis and speaks as if the injured man is already part of her plan, not a person who gets to refuse. Then her identity becomes clear, a special type user tied to space manipulation. Sinka is not simply invading Ruculus. She is claiming people inside it, and her next words reveal that the prison is only one piece of a far more disturbing design. Sinka's plan turns from unsettling to monstrous once she explains what she actually believes. She sees ordinary humanity as something weak and fading, while people with overwhelming powers become the raw material for a new race. In her mind, villains are not criminals to be judged. They are superior genes waiting to be collected. She casts herself as Eve, the mother of that future, and even mentions Sahyeong as someone she once imagined as her Adam. Gang-Yu is pulled into the same fantasy as another possible foundation for her new family, while Canis is also framed as something she can place under that structure.
Gang-Yu does not soften. The more Sinka addresses cruelty in the language of evolution, family, and destiny, the clearer his rejection becomes. Her dream is not salvation. It is control wearing a wedding veil. Inside Ruculus, Sinka pushes the conflict into action by setting Canis against Gang-Yu. The watching prisoners and staff expect power, but what they see is worse than a normal duel. Gang-Yu fights brutally, without polish or restraint, and the shock around him says this is the first time many of them have truly seen him move. Sinka studies the scene with interest, noting that the prisoners on the lower sublevels were captured by heroes of equality, which turns the prison into a monument to Gang-Yu's old life. Canis answers with a defensive technique that appears tied to one of Gang-Yu's dead comrades, twisting grief into a shield. Gang-Yu breaks through anyway, overwhelming the barrier with raw force. Sinka calls him too soft, but the bodies around her are already learning what his softness looks like when it snaps. The fight grows larger as blue destructive force collides with red spatial attacks across the prison battlefield. Canis moves through the chaos with portal-like effects while Sinka watches calmly from the side, annoyed more by dust than danger. That calm is the frightening part. She has already won part of the battle by turning violence into theater. Then she explains how prisoners from the lower sublevels joined her promise of an alpha world, a new humanity built from power, selection, and desire. Gang-Yu becomes her next fixation, not as an enemy to kill but as a partner to bend. Then she delivers the cruelest blow by claiming that a distorted red-black figure before him is connected to his brother. The battlefield changes instantly. Gang-Yu's rage stops being strategy and becomes an eruption. Sinka's claim leaves Gang-Yu trapped between rage and hesitation.
He can tear through enemies, but he cannot easily strike what may be tied to his brother, and Canis notices that weakness with a child's excitement and a villain's cruelty.
He holds the red organic-looking mass like a toy, realizing Gang-Yu cannot simply destroy it.
Then he decides the thing is too large and begins compressing it, turning grief into a smaller, uglier game. The pressure detonates through the battlefield, throwing dust and debris into the air while observers struggle to understand what is happening. At the edge of the chaos, Sinka and the others speak about Gang-Yu's power and his old equality comrades as if his past made him weak. But the more they mock his attachments, the more dangerous his next attack becomes. After the brutal clash, the confrontation slips into something stranger, almost like a mental space or dream wrapped around the crater. Canis survives because his instincts are sharper than his childlike appearance suggests. Even under Gang-Yu's assault, he protects his vital areas with his power. The observers respect that battle sense, but their attention keeps returning to Gang-Yu, whose red-black force hangs over the battlefield like a weapon nobody fully understands.
Sinka's side sees both danger and usefulness in him, which makes their invitation feel less like negotiation and more like possession. Gang-Yu is pressured to decide whether he will join them, but the answer is already written in his anger.
Golden energy gathers around him as he rejects the offer, and the group understands that talking has failed. The prison is ready to become a battlefield again. The story pulls back from fists and power to show the machinery behind Sinka's dream.
A strange memory-like scene gives way to an explanation of the Alpha world, a future supposedly built with Sinka as its Eve.
The conditions are cold, strong abilities matter, violent power matters, and prisoners who can disappear without much resistance become convenient material. What sounds like philosophy becomes a checklist for who deserves to live and who can be erased. Then the conversation moves into high-level politics, with officials, hero-affiliated figures, Raosa, and others forced to confront the scale of the threat. This is not one villain causing chaos in Ruculus anymore. It is a plan that could rewrite society by sorting people into worthy and disposable categories. Gang-Yu becomes someone the powerful must meet, use, or sacrifice before Sinka's idea spreads further. The Hero Association can no longer pretend the crisis is only inside the prison walls.
Powerful figures argue over whether villains can truly change and whether killing them should ever become acceptable policy.
Some mock the idea of supporting Gang-Yu just so he can kill a single enemy, but others see something larger. Sinka is turning mercy, prison, and rehabilitation into openings for catastrophe. A purple-haired woman pushes for setting villains straight, while a blonde long-haired man asks the forbidden question of why heroes cannot kill villains at all. A prison inspector pushes back, insisting that rehabilitation and verification still matter before any execution.
Meanwhile, Gang-Yu himself is not calm enough to be a clean symbol.
He is shaken, angry, and surrounded by red-black rage, which makes the coming decision feel both necessary and terrifying. The debate becomes formal, and that is what makes it so dangerous. Officials gather to decide whether Article 7 should be updated to give Seo Gang-Yu authority to execute criminals. Supporters argue that Sinka and her faction are too dangerous to handle with old assumptions, while opponents warn that the decision is rushed and could open the door to discrimination, abuse, and state-approved revenge.
The vote lands overwhelmingly in favor, 88% to 12, and the room shifts from debate to operation.
Someone calls it execution, while another frames it as a tactical move, as if changing the word can control what comes next.
Memories of past disasters in Gang-Yu's shaken state cut through the politics, then Sinka appears publicly and announces herself.
The law has moved, but so has she, and the execution is about to begin on her terms. This stretch works because it refuses to let revenge stay simple.
Gang-Yu wants punishment for the people who destroyed his life, but every step toward execution creates a larger ethical collapse.
Raosa represents the older hope that heroes can restrain villains without becoming them, while Sinka represents the opposite extreme, a future where power decides who counts as human.
Canis makes that ideology personal by turning Gang-Yu's brother into a weaponized wound.
The vote then makes the conflict public. Once the state gives a grieving hero permission to kill, justice becomes harder to separate from vengeance.
And because Sinka announces herself at the same moment, the new law may already be part of the trap. Subscribe for the next manhwa recap, because Gang-Yu's execution authority may become exactly what Sinka wanted.